I feel good. It's Friday afternoon, I think. It's Friday afternoon, isn't it? Okay. Time does not mean anything when you leave home. You know, you don't have any obligations to meet. You don't have to call anybody. You just come and you're in somebody else's hands. And my responsibility right now is to start talking about step number 2. Willie does such a great job in telling us about the problem again, as Bill talked about it in the 12 and 12, and she brought us up to date as to what our responsibilities are now in terms of our discussion as we continue. Charlie and Joe will come right out of that big book, and they'll go through that thing and help us to understand what it was those first 100 members were trying to tell people like me about how to stay sober. And as Willie mentioned, some years later, the book, the 12 and 12, was published for one or two reasons. Bill wanted to put a book out on the 12 traditions, and that, I think, was what it was going to be originally, but then there was an awful lot of requests by others for a further interpretation of the 12 steps, and so Bill put out the 12 and 12. Much more experience by that time, and as you will see, sometimes the philosophy seems to have been changed a little bit, and the direction and the subject matter changed just a little bit too, in terms of, I'm sure, our founders or co-founders' understanding based on his experience and input. And step 2 said something about, and I'm going to just share this too. When I first looked at this step, I didn't think I needed it. Matter of fact, it stopped me from going any further. I came at Alcoholics Anonymous in 1972 initially, and I got caught up in that fellowship. As Charlie and Joe alluded to, the power of the fellowship, man, it just carried me right through for a couple of years, and I never did anything about the underlying causes or getting into any kind of a spiritual regeneration. I just hung out, and when I first looked at these steps, and I looked at them on the wall, I certainly didn't go to any book to find this out, but I saw them on the wall, and the first step said, John, if you don't drink, you can manage your life. And that's what I thought it said. And I thought that's all I needed, because when I looked at the second step, there was this word sanity in there, and I knew that didn't apply to me. Nobody had ever accused me of being insane, so that must be for those Skid Row bums. They need all 12 of those deals, and all I need is the one. Just don't drink, and you can manage your life. And I thought that's really was applicable, because I didn't drink, and things did get better. But I never recovered. And I went out and drank again and came back into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I came back into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I am the result of the education that I began to get from the time I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a good sponsor, and one who happened to be a very avid and very enthusiastic big book thumper. That was Wesley. And so therefore my understanding and knowledge today about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous came from a good source. I think really the problems in Alcoholics Anonymous today is based and predicated on sponsorship. I know when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, everybody in AA, the day I came, were all gods. They all were just absolute gods. They knew a lot more than I knew. And if you told me something, Barney, I'd believe you, man, because I was so desperate. Anything you said made sense to me. If you said, John, go down to the town square and stand on your head and you'll get sober, I swear I'd have gone. I'd have gone down. And if you'd have given me that information, that's what I thought sobriety was all about. But I believe that today I am the product of good sponsorship. And the reason I'm enthusiastic about the 12 steps in the recovery program is because that's the way I was sponsored. If I got bad information coming in here with that sick mind of mine, I was going to accept whatever. If somebody told me it was 90 meetings in 90 days and I'd be all right, then I'd do that. Or if somebody says just don't drink, go to meetings, and I believe that's what I'd have done. But I had a sponsor who got me into the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, and for the first time somebody directed me to the beginning of the book, because I was the victim of one of those folks who Charlie was talking about. He says, you know, if you want to know how this program works, open it up to chapter 5 and read it, and then you'll know how, you know, what 12 steps are. And that's what I was the victim of the first 2 years. Well, we talked about the problem, and I have gotten this thing down to a pretty simple element. And I think it's because over a period of time I have repetitively heard Charlie, Joe, Willie, and Jack talk about these things in a simple term. And And the first step to me is a statement of John Williams' problem. When I say to you that I'm powerless over alcohol, that my life is unmanageable, I'm stating my problem. And it is pretty good information. Now, I was able to accept and believe that because of the other information you gave me to go along with it. It was not, I was not satisfied to be called insane, and I wasn't satisfied really to be called sick. But when you explained the allergy and the obsession aspect of it and directed me to Dr. Silkworth, I began to understand what the real problem was. And so when I make that statement, step one is just really a statement of my problem. And I've come to believe also that step two is really a statement of the solution. That's the solution to the problem. I can validate that. My experience has been that since I have come to believe in a power greater than myself, I have really been restored to a semblance of sanity. The ability to think rational thoughts or whatever. But I didn't believe that when I looked at it initially. I didn't believe I needed it, and I didn't know how to come to believe. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous an agnostic. I thought I was an agnostic. That sounded pretty good to me because I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know how it fit. I wouldn't deny the idea of God, but I just didn't believe there was one for me. Until one day I was riding around in my automobile listening to a radio show that was coming out of Miami, and on the show they had two guests, and they were rabbis. I hadn't paid any attention to these guys until they started taking phone calls, inquiries, or questions from the audience. And the first guy that called in said he was an agnostic. And of course, when I heard that word, I had been using it a little bit. My antenna went up and I listened. And one rabbi said, well, son, let me ask you a couple of questions. And he says, have you ever read the Old Testament to try to understand things of this nature? And the guy says, no, I haven't done that. And he said, have you ever taken any kind of religious instructions to try to understand the things of this nature? And the guy says, no, I haven't done that either. And the rabbi said, well, son, you're not an agnostic, you're an ignoramus. And when he said that, I knew exactly what my problem was. I was just ignorant. I didn't have anything to base a belief on, except the power of the example that I saw in these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did come to believe. And I like the story in the big book that talks about the Wright brothers. Charlie mentions the Wright brothers. And how their faith was evolved, first of all, from a belief. You've got to believe first of all. And the purpose of step two is to disclose the nature of the mental illness that we're talking about in Alcoholics Anonymous that we've suffered from, and we had to admit the belief that we can overcome it with a power greater than myself. Now, by now I'm convinced that whatever I had been doing up till the time I came into Alcoholics Anonymous had not been working. I had tried to quit. I had even been in Alcoholics Anonymous, but whatever that was that I had been doing was not working. The mental disability of the alcoholic is self-imposed, or so some believe. It is grounded in self-centeredness, which is fueled by alcohol, over which we are powerless. Those who have recovered in our program of Alcoholics Anonymous point conclusively to the fact that willpower is not a factor in the treatment, except that this will be somehow or another brought into line with the will of God. Self-knowledge is not the answer. As I pointed out yesterday, Roland went over and spent 1 year with the most eminent psychiatrist in the world, Carl Jung. And Carl Jung gave him an awful lot of information, and Roland, by his own admission, thought that he had enough knowledge about what triggered him into drinking that he would never have to worry about it again. But he came back and he got drunk. And that had nothing to do with him staying sober. Nor did willpower have anything to do with an individual staying sober. When they talk about this power source, and I like what the big book says about this, when we talk about a power greater than yourself or a higher power, we mean your conception. When we speak to you of God, we mean your individual conception of whatever this power source might be. And it doesn't make any difference what you call it. Its value lies in its recovery value lies in the fact that 1, you believe that it exists, 2, that you approach it with faith, and 3, that you sincerely depend upon it to restore you to mental health. Some of us exclaim, what an order, I can't go through with it. Some members, and I was one of these, coming in as an agnostic, I didn't like the word sanity. And so I thought of it in terms of coming to believe that the power greater than myself could restore me to sane behavior. I could buy that. You see, I'm still coming from the preconceived notions. I'm the sum total of whatever it was I was when I got here. And it's not good. but I still have some hang-ups about some of these words. And so I didn't like the word sanity. The truth is that I could accept the idea that I was insane when I was drinking. I wouldn't argue that. I did some crazy things. I mean, I'd jump on tables and take my clothes off and do all sorts of weird things. But I could accept that I was drunk, man, and that's what you do when you're zipped. And a lot of people who are not alcoholics do that. I've seen them. I've got members of my family who are not alcoholics, but every now and then they'll get tipsy and do crazy things. And but that's not the kind of insanity we're talking about. We're talking about that insanity that this guy repeatedly, time and time again, would get in trouble with alcohol. All the evidence of my insane behavior was there, but yet I kept going back to that alcohol, saying this time it'll be different. I won't do that. I won't pinch that girl on the butt and make my wife mad. I won't run off with somebody else's wife and make all of them mad. I mean, I'll try not to do those things, but I drink and do them anyway. And that's the kind of insanity I think we're talking about. Okay. What I want to talk about is the approach that Bill Wilson used to this step in the 12 and 12. You know, he didn't get into insanity too much in the 12 and 12. He'd already covered that pretty well in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. And I also would like to say this. I think the 12 and 12 is that an instrument which enhances the understanding of the real program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the recovery that we talk about in the big book. Anybody that has any trouble understanding insanity and alcoholism only need to read the Jaywalker story in the big book. I really believe that. I can never forget the first time as I got into the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and read that story for the first time. I said, man, I can understand insanity at long last. I know now what they're talking about just by reading that story. And it precedes the 5th chapter. See, I've never read that before. I'd always started at the 5th chapter. And every now and then, I remember but when I was in my first 2 years, I'd even get the big book out every now and then. I don't know if you've ever read the big book this way or not, but I'd be looking at it, thumbing through it as I sat there, you know, as we do our daily constitutional, thumbing through things. And I'd see something that sounded very wise, and then I'd say, well, I better underline that. And I'd underline it because, you know, I thought my wife might need to see that. So I was going to show it to her. Or I knew somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous that wasn't acting just the way I thought they ought to act, and I'd say, now this fits them to a T. I'll somehow or another let them know that they need to look on page whatever it is here in this book, and they might find the answer to their problem. But I wasn't looking at that book for John Williams. I was always trying to find something that fit somebody else. I guess I thought I was all right. But I don't think Bill addressed the insanity or the sanity issue that much in the 12 and 12. What he did, as I see it, was to say that, okay, the alcoholic comes into AA. He has given a definition of what the problem is. And then he is asked to come to believe in a power source. If he's powerless in the first step, he's got to have a power that will solve his problem. He's already been told that. And a lot of alcoholics don't know how to come to believe in a power greater than themselves. If we could do that, and we all need this, and I think I know why we need this. If we didn't have, or if we had a perfect relation or a good relationship with a power source, we would have no need to come to Alcoholics Anonymous. We could solve our problem without AA. But the belief is sometimes hampered with preconceived notions and some attitudes which have to be looked at and overcome. And Bill Wilson does that in the second step of the 12 and 12. He talks about 5 attitudes which need to be addressed, which need to be defined, and which need to be looked at and overcome so that a person can come to believe. Now, Charlie has or will talk about the process which leads to faith. It's a 5-step deal. The first thing you start with is a belief. You got to have a belief before you can get anything done. The belief, decision, action, results, and faith. A lot of people like me get confused with the second step. They think it is that's the alpha and the omega of the recovery program. Just because one believes does not necessarily provide the answer to alcoholism. The 5 attitudes that Bill talks about, and I'm going to take them one by one. The first one is belligerent denial. That's the one who says he can't believe. The second attitude which needs to be overcome is some of us come in and say that we had faith at one time but lost it. The third attitude which needs to be addressed is the one who feels intellectually self-sufficient. And the one who comes in and really confused and says something to the effect that they're plumb disgusted with religion and all its works. And the other one is the one who professes to have faith but still smells of alcohol. Now these are the five attitudes that Bill takes a look at in the 12 and 12. And here it seems, in the 12 and 12, Bill uses a technique in his writings which I see an awful lot of us using when we're talking. We start bringing in the sponsor and making him the fall guy for all of this stuff. You know what I'm saying? It's easy for me sometimes when I'm talking to say that Wesley told me so and so and so and so, and what I'm trying to do is to convey a message. It's not for me to stand up and admonish anybody, but I can admonish me through my sponsor, and perhaps you could get the message. And Bill Wilson started using this technique in the 12 and 12, in which he brings a sponsor in to quieten someone's nerve or whatever. Now, the first one here is the one who is belligerent denial. That's the guy who just has begun to shake his fist at God, and he is just don't want to hear about it. He's just tired and sick through with the idea of God, and the 12 and 12 says something to the effect that he's in a savage state of mind. And as a matter of fact, he's the kind of a guy, he's very similar in this case to the one who is intellectually self-sufficient, because he thinks that his philosophy of life, by believing in something greater than himself, his philosophy of life is now being threatened. See? He has been the source of intellect, and he thinks that man is the beginning and end of everything. And so he feels threatened in terms of the idea that Alcoholics Anonymous asked him to come to believe. It's this position of weakness, and it's pussyfoot. And it seems to him that an almost impossible task to admit that he even needs to believe in a power greater than himself. And he does not want to give up his old idea of man's supremacy over the universe. Now, how do you overcome that kind of an attitude? And remember this, in the appendix on the spiritual experience as it's defined, it says back there that there are two things that will preclude one from having a spiritual experience or spiritual awakening. One is intolerance, and the other is belligerent denial. So you can't have a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening with an attitude of belligerent denial. You just can't have it. Explain to them. So if you've got that kind of an attitude at the beginning, in terms of understanding what the solution is and coming to believe in a power greater than yourself, you've got to get through this barrier if you're one of those who has taken this attitude. And here Bill brings in the sponsor, and he says, after he defines the belligerent one, he says, at this juncture his AA sponsor usually laughs. Well, I don't like my sponsor laughing at me when I'm hurting so bad, but this is the way he describes it. He tells the guy, relax, you don't have to buy it all at once. Remember that it says we came. And Wesley in his good English used to say you got to do a lot of coming before you say we came. And then the sponsor says to get out of the debating society. You don't have to debate the existence of God. That's not what this thing is all about anyway. And it says the sponsor suggests that the guy keep an open mind. It suggests also that he look around and and look at the results of people who say that since I came to believe in a power greater than myself, I have been restored to sanity, and I am recovering from my disease of alcoholism. The sponsor also suggests that one stop fighting and practice the rest of the program as enthusiastically as we can. In other words, quit concentrating on fighting this issue and going on with the rest of the program. And it also suggests for one like this, who has an intolerance for belief in a power greater than himself, that he might put his faith in something like an AA group that he goes to. At least the group exemplifies a power greater than himself, which it seems to be staying sober, which this guy hadn't been up until the time that he starts looking at this thing. I think also for me, and I'm just going to share this with you, is that my understanding of this step as I go through, and I belong to a group that goes through the steps on a repetitive basis, and I always try to put my mind at the point in the recovery process that we're at, and so that it's not prejudiced by what's coming down the road. And it's easier for me to understand step 2 today when I look at it in that respect. If I just say to myself, okay, I'm going to be like a new alcoholic. You've given me the definition of what the problem is. Now the next juncture is to come to believe. And I don't go any further than that. I don't start talking about the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th step. I keep it in whatever the step is. Okay, so that's one attitude, the belligerent denial, and some suggestions as to how to overcome it. The next one he talks about is a guy who had faith but lost it. I fall in that category too. I've already fallen into the category of the first one. I have been belligerent. Second category is one who had faith but lost it. I'm a guy who came from a family in which was a sort of a Christian family in which I was made to go to church, Sunday school, and all that good stuff. We were believers and never had any doubt about it. But when I left home at the age of 17, I left God there and all that mess with it. And I didn't have any active participation in things of that nature until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. The book says something to the effect that sometimes, with respect to getting one to believe, it's easier to work with an atheist than it is with one who's had the faith but lost it, because he found it didn't work, supposedly. And so he addresses this. The guy who had faith but lost it is one who has drifted into indifference. One who has become filled with self-sufficiency. That's me. I don't know about you, but that's me. I even became prejudiced against religion. I began to draw my own conclusions based on my sick mind in terms of people in my neighborhood that I'd see getting up every morning and going off somewhere about 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And I was sitting there with a beer in my hand, pointing fingers and saying, look at them hypocrites. They're going off to church this morning, and then tomorrow he'll be cheating them again down at the store. That was the way I was, I just thought they were all a bunch of hypocrites. I had developed that attitude. I don't know where it came from. It was just, I guess it sort of elevated me in my position when I pointed the finger at the other person. I became downright defiant because God had not fulfilled my demands. Let's see if I can find a couple of examples of that in the book. A number of AAs can say to the drifter, yes, we were diverted from our childhood faith too. The overconfidence of youth was too much for us. Of course, we were glad that a good home and religious training had given us certain values, and I identified with that because that was me. We were still sure that we ought to be fairly honest, tolerant, and just, and I remember having, I used to go around wishing everybody would operate by the golden rule because I was doing that. Why weren't they? And we ought to be ambitious and hardworking. We became convinced that such simple rules of fair play and decency would be enough. And they weren't. As material success founded upon no more than these ordinary attributes began to come to us, and I was one who began to get successful without God in my life in any way, shape, or form, I felt I was winning at the game of life. Now, on page 29, I am in the big book, 12 and 12. This was exhilarating and it made us happy. Why should we bother with theological abstraction and religious duties, or with the state of our souls here and the hereafter? The here and now was good enough for us. The will to win would carry us through, but when alcohol began to have its way with us, now see, that's something I've heard this morning about, and I think Willie talked about. There was a time when these things didn't apply. They only applied to me when I got into the full throes of my alcoholism. But when alcohol began to have its way with us, finally, when all of our scorecard read 0 and we saw that one more strike would put us out of the game forever, we had to look for our lost faith. When I reached that point, when my scorecard read 0 minus, is when I finally got into Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time. And I had to start pursuing that lost faith. It was in AA that we rediscovered it, and so can you. So that's the second attitude. The belligerent denial, and now they talk about the one who had faith but lost it. The third one, and I'm sure this probably didn't apply to anybody in this room, but we got some down in South Florida that it applies to. It's the one who feels intellectually self-sufficient. Oh, I love this one. Those are the ones who are too smart for their own good. You ever run into anybody like that? they use their education to blow themselves up into prideful balloons. I'm a college graduate, see, and I've used that many times in trying to convince you that you don't have to explain in detail these things. To me, hell, I've got a college-educated mind here. Don't you know who you're dealing with? And the one who thinks like that is one who feels he can float above the rest of the folks on his brain power alone. You know that happens even in sobriety. I've seen it, and I've been part of it. And feels that there's nothing that man can't do. Now, that's the intellectually self-sufficient one. How do you overcome that attitude? It needs to be overcome. You cannot process yourself into a belief in a power greater than yourself with them kind of attitudes. Well, you got to start by asking yourself, if you're so damn smart, what are you doing in Alcoholics Anonymous? I mean, that's the first question you ask yourself. If you're so smart, what are you doing here? Then you take a quick inventory and see what alcohol has done, and see what that those who won so handsomely in the walk turn out to be all-time losers. Humility and intellect can be compatible if we place humility first. When we do this, we receive the kind of a gift of faith, a faith that works. So you cannot operate with that intellectually self-sufficient attitude in Alcoholics Anonymous and develop a belief in a power greater than oneself that will restore you to sanity. Then the next one they talk about, all right, that's 3. Intellectually self-sufficient, had faith but lost it in the belligerent denial. The next one they talk about these are confused people, but I was one of these confused people. And the book says that, and I quote, "We were plumb disgusted with religion and all its works." You see, that's somebody who comes into Alcoholics Anonymous and gets confused about what it is we do here. They all of a sudden think that they've tied themselves up with some sort of a cult or religious bunch. And, you know, I can see how that would be easy to think that way. I know I thought those thoughts when I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous. You know why I thought them thoughts? Because they opened that meeting with a prayer. And they closed it with a prayer. And somehow or another, right before they closed that thing, they started passing these baskets around. You know where I'd seen all that before? In a church. And I thought that's what I was getting tied up in. And then I could accept the idea. This is another religious outfit. Let me get the hell out of here. I've tried that route and it don't work. So I can see how people can be confused with that. Especially those who are not ready for sobriety. They can hang their hat on anything. Okay. Also in this bunch we see and find a lot of defiance. Why? Maybe one, because it's God has not delivered the good things in life we specified. Oh, that's where it is in this book about those who prayed for certain things and didn't get them, and that also gets you turned off on religion. Here it is. As psychiatrists have often observed, defiance is the outstanding characteristics of many an alcoholic. I'm on page 31 in my book. So it's not strange that a lot of us have had our day at defying God Himself. Sometimes it's because God has not delivered us the good things in life we specified, as a greedy child makes an impossible list for Santa Claus. More often, though, we have met up with some major calamity and, to our way of thinking, lost out because God deserted us. Okay, see if this sounds familiar to anybody. The girl we wanted to marry had other notions, or the guy we wanted to marry had other notions. We prayed to God that she'd change her mind, but she didn't. Well, you know who you're going to blame for a deal like that. You're not going to accept that responsibility, are you? Hell no, it's God. How about praying for healthy children and we presented with sick ones, or none at all? We prayed for a promotion at business and none came. Well, you see, God ain't answering the prayers, so how can you have faith? Loved ones upon whom we hardly depended were taken from us by so-called acts of God. I've seen that. I've seen it in sobriety. A lot of times we doubt. Those of us of little faith have doubt when these things happen. We begin to question, why would God let that happen? And then the unkindest cut of all was, damn this faith business. When we started getting in trouble with alcohol and we prayed for relief and nothing happened, that's when we really thought it was unfair. But for us, if that happened to us and we're in the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, was not our prayer answered? Okay. When we encountered AA, the fallacy of our defiance was revealed. At no time had we asked what God's will for us was. I never thought in terms of praying like that. My upbringing always led me to believe that God, when I was hurting, God was punishing me, and that I never thought to ask about God's will for John Williams. There was a sort of a code of ethics I was supposed to operate by, and if I deviated from that code of ethics, I was going to get hurt. I'd have a wreck in my car, I'd cut my finger, I'd stump my toe, or I'd bruise my head. And every time I used to do these things, I used to say to myself, I wonder what the hell I'm getting punished for now. And then as this evolves, and I'm beginning to be one of the greatest sinners that Pompano Beach ever seen, and with this kind of thinking that God's going to punish you, then I figured out real soon that I had so many strikes against me there wasn't no need to even bother with this mess. I'm going to hell. I may as well enjoy the journey. That's just the way I thought. There was no need for me to pray in terms of, God, what is your will for me today? I'd fall down and hurt myself or have a wreck or something like that, and I'd really get banged up, and I'd just say, what the hell am I getting punished for? Of course, I knew it was for being unfaithful, it was for stealing and lying and cheating and all those things. I just sort of expected those things to happen. And every now and then, you see, another thing that happened to me was that I was raised in a family. I was raised as a Southern Baptist, and then when I got married, I converted to Catholicism. See, I had been dunked and I had been sprinkled, and none of it did me any good. But I really liked the way them Catholics thought. That's why my wife didn't have any troubles when she suggested that I convert. When I was in my catechism, when I was going through that, I loved that catechism, that purgatory mess. I wasn't really going to go to hell. I was just going to go to a station and sort of wait for I don't know how many millions of years. Then I was going to go to heaven. They had some good beliefs, so I fell right into that. But you see, this is the way I was going when I came. This is how confused I was when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why, if I wanted to put a handle on what I was, I said I was an agnostic. But as I mentioned, I was really an ignoramus. And really, the idea that God had deserted me, and I just felt that I didn't have any right anymore to call upon Him for any more help. And then the last one they talk about is the guy who has full of faith but still smelling of alcohol. I have not been that as much as I have observed that. I have seen some. I remember the last time it happened was at the early meeting of my home group, in which we have an early meeting which is basically and primarily for the beginner or somebody who's just coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, because we talk about the first three steps, which is the problem, the solution, and the decision. And we had a gal come in there one night that was about half tanked up, and she was a very attractive. I can always spot them attractive women, and I had my eye on her. Just kind of watching her, see, and I was thinking to myself, I believe that girl's under the influence of alcohol. And then sometimes those that come to the meeting under those conditions just can't wait to say something. They're not shy at all. And something was mentioned by one of the members in good faith, and they were talking, about God as they understood Him or whatever. And this gal chimed in and she said, "Well, I don't have to worry about that. I'm a born again Christian." And she was just all messed up. And she started talking about being saved again and all that stuff. And I said, "Well, what are you doing all drunken over here at AA then? What's the problem?" And she didn't have an answer for that. And I said, "Well, what we're talking about here is developing a faith, not the quantity of faith, but the quality of faith." And that's what this attitude is all about. The ones we find that they talk about here, they talk about such a thing as emotionalism. A lot of times in Alcoholics Anonymous, I thought I had had an intuitive thought, or maybe heard from the man upstairs, and it ultimately turns out to be wishful thinking. And sometimes they talk about wallowing in emotionalism and getting this confused with faith. God, I've been there too, even in sobriety. Bill Wilson had a sample of that when he was trying to get sober in Sam's Calvary mission, Sam Shoemaker's mission. Remember that story in the book when he went down there and met this Finnish guy or some foreigner on the way down there, and they got about half cranked up on the way down? They got in the meeting, met, I think Evie was there, and Bill got up to the podium because he heard people witnessing and testifying and talking about JC, and he felt moved to say something, and he got up there and embarrassed the hell out of Evie, and he got up there and later Evie said, well, boy, it sounded real good. It sounded good what you said. And Bill went through an emotional conversion at that time. And if he'd have stayed sober forever after that moment, we'd probably said he had a spiritual experience, but it was an emotional conversion. And I guess that's one of the differences between a spiritual experience or an awakening and an emotional conversion is the length of time. One doesn't last and the other one does. Okay, step 2 says that it's the rallying point for all of us. Whether agnostic, atheist, former believer, we can stand together on this step. True humility and an open mind can lead us to faith. And every AA meeting is an assurance that God will restore us to sanity if we rightly relate ourselves to Him. So here in the 12 and 12, we have seen Bill not talk too much about sanity as such, like he did in the Jaywalker story or the episodes of the stories of some of the businessmen who are triggered by insane thoughts into going to alcoholism. But he's talking more about what I needed to do and what I needed to understand so that I could really come to believe. Because I did have some of these attitudes when I came here. I had a little bit of all of them, except probably not so much that I was full of faith but still smelled of alcohol. But the other ones I could really identify with. And I really began to understand what his pitch was in the 12 and 12. And unfortunately, I didn't start understanding it until I was about 7 or 8 years sober. And this is why I know that repetitiveness in this program is a real valid thing. I had been going through this thing, all of a sudden it began to dawn on me what Bill was addressing himself to. 5 attitudes that needed to be understood so that a person could come to believe. And more than anything else, it helps me as a sponsor of a new alcoholic. Because every now and then you'll run into one who will give you an argument. And he'll place himself in one of these categories, and you can just about bet your bottom dollar that he will be or have one or more of all of these attitudes when it comes to that proposition. And thank God I know that in the 12 and 12 it addresses the one who feels like he's intellectually self-sufficient. Or it addresses the one who says, well, I used to believe, but I don't believe anymore. Or he said, I know you're a bunch of religious nuts and I don't have any faith in religion. Or the one who's shaking his fist at God. I know where I can go and suggest to him that he can go and perhaps overcome some of these attitudes so that he can truly come to believe that a power greater than himself can restore him to sanity, which is, in the essence, the solution to the problem of alcoholism. Now, I think I've got about, how much time have I got left? Yeah. Okay, but we got about 10 minutes left in the hour. So what I'd like to do, if anybody would like to a little input about the second step, perhaps we can have that at this time. Anybody like to make a comment about how they were able to come to believe, or perhaps overcome a hurdle with respect to coming to believe in a power greater than themselves, or did we all just come in and accept that? Lock, stock, and barrel. I think that there's mics on either side of the room, or if you feel comfortable at coming to this podium, just come right on ahead. Okay. Does anybody not think that perhaps the second step is the solution to the problem? Anybody got any other ideas about that? This is just the beginning, see, of the process of understanding. The problem has been defined, and now we're giving the answer. Now we're going to find out with step 3, we're sort of sitting on the fence. What are we going to do about it? We're going to return to whence we came, or are we going to move on? We've got to make a decision. And Felix is over there. He's going to tell us something.
Here, and I got up and spoke a little bit, but I'd like to share with you a little bit about what happened to me in this area. When I came in, I was totally disillusioned about myself and my life, and I was brought up quite religiously, a Roman Catholic, and I couldn't understand, the same as a lot of us, why God was punishing me all the time. But anyway, when I came in here, I saw something in you people that I wanted and I liked, and I wanted to become like you. And I had to learn to understand you so I could understand myself. And coming to the meetings and sitting around the tables, we're not getting through, eh? Well, maybe I can talk loud enough that everybody could hear me. But anyway, you started talking about what you had to do when you come here, besides read the big book, going to meetings, and get yourself a sponsor and get active. In the beginning, it was ask for help in the morning and give thanks at night. And you talked about a God of your understanding and a power greater than yourselves. Well, a God of my understanding I didn't understand, and but the power greater than myself was in you people. You set an example for me that I wanted. So I started to do what you people suggested, but instead of talking to a God of my understanding, I simply said, whatever it is out there that's keeping these other people sober, please help me stay sober today. And then it started to work. After a few months went by, I realized I was staying sober. I was getting a little healthier physically, and mind started to clear a little bit. And then I started to believe in a God. All the first three steps happened to me at one time. We went down to the maximum security penitentiary in Kingston, and I gave my first talk down there with my sponsor. And I asked for help before I spoke, and I couldn't talk at the tables up until this time for more than about 30 seconds. And I spoke for 35 minutes. And I knew I wasn't doing it by myself. Excuse me for a minute, I'll put this up. And then I realized that this power greater than myself that you people were talking about was a God, and I started to understand at this particular time that He was helping me with things that I couldn't do on my own or by myself. And then I got into the third step, and I won't comment on that now until we get into the further discussion. But that's how I started. I started with whatever you people were using, please help me with it, and it worked. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Absolutely true, because I think it's in the fellowship that we see that power of example that transform us sometimes from being belligerent or questioning the idea. But you come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and after going to a few meetings and seeing people and hearing them, hearing the testimony that they give, you cannot doubt the power that's in that room. You cannot doubt that what they say, when they say that since they've come to believe in the power greater than themselves, their life has been transformed. And then especially when they tell you about what they used to be like, and you say, well, I used to drink like that. They say they're an alcoholic, I must be one. And then they say they come to believe and they did steps, and you say, well, if that's what they did, maybe that's what I got to do. See, this is a process. It's an evolution. You just don't come in here. I don't believe. I didn't. I don't see too many people doing this. That come in here and just jump on this thing and buy hook, line, and sinker. It is not the character of the alcoholic to do that. The character of the alcoholic is defiance. You know, show me. I'm from Missouri. That's what they say in the States. That's the show me state. I just don't believe it. But your desperation, and I think the intensity with which one will believe, is predicated on the deep desire one has for sobriety. You show me one that's just trying to get off the hook with his family or just trying to satisfy a judge, he ain't going to get into coming to believe too deeply. He's just trying to overcome a problem. But when one realizes that his literal life is on the line here, and he's very intense about this and wants to understand it, he's going to have that mind opened up. And it's not going to be closed. And then when you reach the point in your working a program with which you know your literal life is on the line, then you will not argue, you won't find fault with, you will begin to accept things that were unacceptable before coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. Somehow or another, some of us reach that point where we're ready to jump off, and we know that if we go one step further, we're going to die. But somehow or another we're yanked back and we find ourselves in Alcoholics Anonymous and feel like the prescription of life is here. And you're the doctor. You're telling me what I need to do to overcome the malady. And the intensity with which I do that is predicated on my desire to live. Seems to me. Anybody else got a comment? If not, we'll close and we'll take about a 10 or 15 minute break and come back for step number 3. Jack, you're next? Good. Okay, Jack will be back with step number 3. Let's just take a little break for 15 minutes.